If you live long enough to sit on the porch and watch your grandsons chase each other across the lawn with plastic guns, you realize that memory doesn't play out like a continuous strip of movie film. It is fragmented. It is smell, it is touch, and above all, it is sound. For me, the Pacific War wasn't a grand strategic map, nor was it the bombastic rhetoric of General MacArthur. My war was composed of a specific metallic percussion, bang, 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 ping. That was the crisp sound of the en-bloc clip ejecting from an M1 Garand after the 8th round was spent. In the humid, rotting, death-filled jungles from 1942 to 1945, that sound meant two things. First, you had just poured 8 rounds of .3006 caliber death into an enemy trying to gut you. Second, you were still alive, and if your hands were fast enough, you could turn into the Grim Reaper again in 3 seconds flat. My name is Thomas Miller, but everyone called me Tommy. In 1942, I was a second lieutenant in the 164th Infantry Regiment of the North Dakota National Guard. We were the first Army unit sent to reinforce the Marines on Guadalcanal. Before that, we were hicks, farmers, civilians who only wore uniforms on weekends. After that, we became witnesses to history. Dial the clock back to 1941, Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. Back then, if you asked any grizzled veteran what the soul of a rifle was, he'd slap the stock of a Springfield M1903 and tell you, this is precision, this is reliability. True, the M1903 was a fine weapon, the pinnacle of bolt-action rifles. Accurate, elegant, that was the lesson we learned from the First World War. For every shot, you had to manually lift the bolt, pull back to eject, push forward to chamber, lock it, and aim again. There was a mechanical beauty to it, a rhythm belonging to the marksman. But when we were first issued those M1 Garands, still smelling of Cosmoline, the camp exploded with chatter. "This thing looks like a baseball bat," complained my sergeant, Pop Harrison, the man who would later save my life at the Matanikau River. "No bolt handle? Gas-operated auto-loading? Sir, this thing is gonna jam in the mud just like my broken-down tractor." Harrison's worry represented the majority view at the time. This semi-automatic rifle looked too complex, too delicate. More importantly, it challenged the core philosophy of our training: marksmanship. The dogma back then was one shot, one man. However, training changed everything. I still remember firing the M1 with live ammo for the first time at the range. I lay prone on the sandbags, jamming that full 8-round clip down into the receiver. The bolt snapped forward with a sharp clack. I pulled the stock into my shoulder, aiming at the target 200 yards out. Trigger squeeze. Bang! The gun kicked back, but before I could reach for a bolt handle that wasn't there, the sights had almost settled back to the original point of aim. My fingers squeezed again instinctively. Bang! In that instant, I froze. No working the bolt, no breaking my shooting stance, no reacquiring the target. As long as my finger was fast enough, I could send 8 rounds, powerful enough to punch through light armor, into a target's chest in 4 seconds. When the soldiers of our company began to create that rolling, continuous thunder on the range, I knew something had shifted. This wasn't just a weapon swap. This was an industrial revolution in infantry tactics. But I didn't know then that this revolutionary firepower would spell a hopeless, asymmetrical slaughter for an enemy still drunk on the illusions of their victory in the Russo-Japanese War. October 13th, 1942. We arrived on Guadalcanal. If you want to know what hell looks like, forget Dante's Inferno. Just go to the canal. The air felt like fermented solid matter. Breathing it in filled your lungs with the smell of rotting vegetation, sulfur, and an indescribably sickly sweet odor. I learned later that was the smell of bodies decomposing rapidly in the tropical heat. When the 164th landed, the brothers of the 1st Marine Division had already been holding the line for 2 months. They looked terrible, uniforms in tatters, eyes sunken, skin jaundiced by malaria. When you see the men known as the world's fiercest warriors looking like that, your heart involuntarily skips a beat. But the first thing I noticed was their weapons. Many Marines were still carrying the old M1903 Springfields. Although the Corps had started issuing the Garand, the ratio of bolt-action rifles was still high in the early days of the campaign. I saw a Marine corporal staring at our platoon's brand-new M1s, his eyes glowing with envy. "Hey, doggy!" The corporal blew a smoke ring at me, pointing to the piece on my shoulder. "Watch that rifle. Out here, that thing is worth more than gold. If you don't want it, I've got plenty of Japanese gold teeth to trade." "Is it really that effective?" I handed him a cigarette, trying to break the ice. The corporal took a deep drag, his eyes turning dark and grim. "Lieutenant, when you're facing 100 crazy bastards screaming Banzai and charging you, you'll wish that rifle was a machine gun. Those damn Japanese monkeys, they aren't afraid to die. You kill one with your Springfield, and by the time you work the bolt, 2 more have already put bayonets in your gut. But this gun," he patted my M1, "this gun keeps you alive." That corporal's words became my gospel 10 days later. Before the shooting started, we needed to understand our opponent. The Japanese were primarily equipped with the Type 38 rifle, known to us as the Arisaka. From a purely mechanical standpoint, the Type 38 was an excellent weapon. It fired a 6.5mm round with minimal recoil and high accuracy. Combined with an absurdly long barrel and an even longer bayonet, it gave the Japanese a massive reach advantage in hand-to-hand combat. And that distinctive dust cover really did help in the filth. But it represented an obsolete philosophy of war. Japanese tactical doctrine was built on spirit over matter. They believed that precise shooting coupled with fearless bayonet charges could rout any enemy. Their infantry squads relied on a light machine gun, the Type 11 or Type 96, for suppression, while riflemen focused on precision kills. That tactic might have worked in China, where the opposing firepower was weaker. But they were running headlong into the 164th Infantry, armed by the American industrial machine. Every one of our squads had a Browning automatic rifle, BAR, but more crucially, every single rifleman held an M1 Garand. This meant the instantaneous fire projection of one of our squads was theoretically equal to 2 or 3 Japanese squads. This wasn't just a numbers game, it was the ruthless crushing of physics. The night of October 24th, 1942. The history books call it the climax of the Battle for Henderson Field. For the 164th, it was our final exam. It was a pitch-black night, the kind where you can't see your hand in front of your face. The tropical rain had just stopped, leaving the air thick with moisture. We were ordered to reinforce the line, held by Marine Lieutenant Colonel Chester Puller. Our position was on a ridge south of the airfield, facing a cleared field of fire with dense jungle beyond. The Japanese were in there. Lieutenant General Masao Maruyama's 2nd Division, thousands of soldiers, preparing to either drive us into the sea or kill us all. Around 2,200 hours, the jungle began to stir. First came the sound of snapping branches, then the strange clinking of metal. "Steady," I whispered from my foxhole, my palms sweating against the wood of my M1. "Wait for a target." Suddenly, a red flare tore through the night sky. Immediately, a blood-curdling scream erupted from the trees. "Tenno Heika Banzai!" In that moment, the gates of hell swung open. Countless dark shapes burst from the tree line, surging toward our wire like a tidal wave. "Fire! Fire at will!" I pulled the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. If you haven't been there, it's hard to understand the dominance of a semi-automatic rifle in defense. With a bolt action, the rhythm is aim, shoot, unlock bolt, pull back, push forward, lock bolt, reacquire aim, shoot. During that process, your eyes leave the target, your posture shifts, And crucially, there is a firepower gap of about 1.5 to 2 seconds. When facing a Japanese Banzai Charge, those 2 seconds are the difference between life and death. But that night, we had M1s. A Japanese officer waving a katana appeared in my sights. Bang! The first round hit his shoulder. He stumbled but didn't fall, continuing his charge. With a bolt action, I would have been cycling the bolt, giving him 5 meters of ground, but I just twitched my index finger again. Bang! The second round punched through his chest. He dropped, but I didn't stop. 2 soldiers were right behind him trying to scale the wire. Bang, bang, 2 more rounds. One took a hit to the thigh and collapsed into the mud. The other kept crawling. Bang, bang. Barely 4 seconds. With a Type 38, I might have gotten off 2 shots. With the M1, I had poured 6 rounds into 3 different targets. All along the line, hundreds of M1 Garands roared in unison. It wasn't the sporadic popping of popcorn. It was a continuous, rhythmic thunder, like a giant industrial shredder running at full speed. In that battle, I truly understood the asymmetry of infantry firepower. The Japanese attack was brave, even insane. They used the cover of night to get close, throw grenades, and settle it with bayonets. Their logic was, in night fighting and melee, American firepower superiority is negated, and Japanese bayonet skills rule the field. But they miscalculated one variable, the close quarters capability of the M1 Garand. Around 0200, a small group of Japanese breached our left flank, getting within 30 meters. In the old days, this was the moment to fix bayonets and pray. But I heard Sergeant Harrison yell from the left, "Feed 'em some peanuts." It was pure slaughter. At that range, we didn't need precision aiming. We just pointed our muzzles at the shadows and hammered the triggers. Bang, 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 ping, click, clack, reload. Bang, 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 ping. A Japanese soldier with a bayonet-tipped Type 38 charged my foxhole. I could see the grimace on his face and the star on his helmet. He stopped, raised his rifle, and fired. Crack! A bullet slammed into the sandbag of my cover, kicking up dirt. Then, he began to work the bolt. That was the last mistake of his life. In the single second it took him to cycle that action, I put 3 rounds into him. The first missed. The second hit his gut. The third shattered his jaw. This is the generational gap between bolt action and semi-auto. When you miss with a bolt gun, you pay with time to correct it. With the M1, you correct in 0.2 seconds. That margin of error is simply the margin of survival. That night, it was as if an invisible wall had been erected in front of our line. A wall made of copper-jacketed point 3006. The Japanese crashed against it wave after wave, shattering like surf against a reef. When dawn broke, the guns finally fell silent. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the jungle mist and illuminated the scene before us, even the saltiest Marines fell silent. The clearing in front of our position was carpeted with Japanese bodies. In some places, they were stacked so high they blocked our firing ports. Harrison and I climbed out of our hole to check the field. I picked up a Japanese Type 38. It was long, the wood stock swollen from the damp. I tried working the bolt. Smooth, yes, but in that adrenaline-soaked chaos, that complex motion was simply suicide. I looked at the owner lying next to it. He looked young, maybe 20. His ammo pouches were full of bullets, all in those 5-round stripper clips. "Look at this." Harrison pointed to the bullet holes on the body. "That's the difference, Lieutenant." The soldier had been hit 4 times. If we had bolt guns, Harrison lit a cigarette, his hand trembling slightly. That would be us lying there this morning. They hit us too hard. If our rate of fire was half as slow, they'd have been in the trenches with us. Harrison was right. That night, the 164th Infantry, alongside the 7th Marines, broke the back of the 2nd Division. The Japanese left thousands of dead, Our casualties were negligible by comparison. It was a victory of industry, a victory for the assembly lines of Detroit and Springfield Armory. That morning, sitting on an ammo crate wiping down my M1, the barrel heat-stained blue and the handguard scorched black, I felt the tension of the recoil spring. I had never loved a cold piece of metal so much. From that moment on, I knew the nature of the Pacific War had changed. The Japanese were still fierce, still cruel, still willing to die. But against the M1 Garand, their Bushido became a tragic, obsolete performance. They were fighting steel with spirit, and steel is always harder. As the Guadalcanal campaign pushed inland, the terrain grew more complex. Dense vegetation, visibility often cut to less than 10 meters. In this environment, meeting engagements were our daily bread. You'd be marching, and suddenly a Japanese machine gun or a few snipers would pop up from the bush. The Japanese Type 38 had one advantage here: a small firing signature. The 6.5mm powder burned with little smoke and little flash, and the report wasn't deafening. It was often hard to pinpoint where the shot came from. We were constantly bedeviled by these invisible ghosts. But once we found them, the M1 Garand suppression capability demonstrated absolute hegemony. On one patrol up the Matanikau, we were ambushed. The Japanese were dug into the roots of a massive banyan tree. A few rifles and a light machine gun pinned us down. Covering fire. Under old tactics, we'd need to set up a machine gun to suppress them effectively. But in a squad equipped with M1s, every rifleman was a small machine gun nest. I popped up and dumped a clip toward the general direction. I couldn't see the specific enemy, but 8 rounds covered the area around that tree in 2 seconds, sending bark and leaves flying. Immediately, 3 soldiers next to me joined in. In an instant, 30+ rounds blanketed that zone. The Japanese fire withered immediately. This is the key point: the democratization of suppression. On the Japanese side, suppression was the job of the light machine gunner. Riflemen could only peck away. If the gunner was taken out, the squad's firepower fell off a cliff. On our side, even if our bar man was reloading, the riflemen could maintain a high density of fire. This rain of fire kept the Japanese heads down. While they were pinned, we'd flank, throw grenades, or call in mortars. We learned a simple rule in the jungle: when ambushed, don't save bullets. Empty your clip into that bush. The M1 gave us the luxury to do that. We didn't just have better guns, we had better logistics. Speaking of logistics, that was another gap that drove the Japanese to despair. Late in the campaign, we took prisoners. They were skeletal, suffering from severe malnutrition. Their diaries were filled with longing for food. Their supply lines had been crushed by American air and sea power. Their rifles were reliable, but complex to make, and ammo shortages were appearing at the front. We, on the other hand, had it rough, but we had ammo. Crates of .30-06 arrived by Liberty ship, landing craft, truck, jeep, and even half-tracks we called mechanical mules. I once saw a rookie panic and fire several rounds without seeing an enemy. Old man Harrison didn't chew him out for wasting ammo, he just tapped his helmet. "It's all right, kid. The boys at Springfield Armory are working overtime just for you. Shoot as much as you want. Just don't let those Japs get close." That was confidence. The high fire rate of the M1 meant high consumption. Without logistics, the gun is a club. But American industry supported this luxurious way of war. We were trading ammo for lives. The Japanese could only trade lives for ammo. When the Japanese finally evacuated Guadalcanal in February 1943, I stood on the beach at Lunga Point, looking at the scarred jungle and the mountains of supplies. We had won, not just a strategic victory, but a psychological one. At the start, the Japanese seemed like invincible jungle masters. Now we saw their hand. They were brave, but tactically rigid zealots, holding World War I weapons, trying to fight a modernized World War II army. I stroked the walnut stock of my Garand, now covered in scratches and dings, the metal worn white. But it had never failed me. In mud, sand, and rain, it kept its lethal rhythm. Bang, 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 the ping. Guadalcanal was just the start. On this giant Pacific chessboard, we had just made the first move. I knew the road ahead was long, more islands, more Japanese. But I was no longer afraid, because I knew that as long as I had this rifle, as long as I could hear that crisp ping, I held the initiative. We had proven that semi-automatic fire wasn't just a technical improvement, it was a revolution in infantry tactics. And that revolution had only just begun. If Guadalcanal was where we learned to survive the Reaper's scythe, the years that followed were when we learned to swing it ourselves. By 1943 and 1944, the strategic situation had flipped. We were no longer defenders huddled in foxholes waiting for charges. Admirals Nimitz and MacArthur devised island hopping. This meant we had to leave the trenches and go into the jungles, caves, and bunkers the Japanese had spent years fortifying, digging them out like termites. This was where the M1 Garand truly showed its power in offensive suppression. During the Bougainville campaign, I was a first lieutenant in F Company. The Japanese didn't do mass suicide charges like on Guadalcanal anymore. They got smart, or maybe just scared. They used the terrain to build complex crossfire nets and spider holes for ambushes. Attacking such positions is an infantryman's nightmare. According to the manual, you need machine gun cover while infantry advances. But in the thick rainforest, heavy machine guns couldn't keep up. That's when every soldier with an M1 effectively became a light machine gunner. I remember a skirmish on Hill 260. Our point squad was pinned in tall grass by a Type 92 heavy machine gun, the Woodpecker. Bullets were trimming the grass over our heads. With bolt-action rifles, we'd have been in trouble. To return fire effectively, you need volume, but a bolt-action breaks the fire every time you cycle it, giving the enemy a gap to turn you into Swiss cheese. Second squad, third squad, walking fire. Drown that nest, I roared. This is what George Patton meant when he called the M1 the greatest battle implement ever devised. Not just because it killed, but because it changed the flow of battle. Even if we didn't hit the gunner, when a dozen M1 rifles poured nearly 100 rounds into that position in seconds, the Japanese gunner panicked. He had to duck or stop firing because our ricochets were filling his eyes with dirt. In that instant, fire superiority changed hands. Move! 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 Using those few seconds of silence, our bazooka man moved up and ended the fight with a rocket. Later, we checked the nest. The gunner was curled up in the bunker. He wasn't hit in the head, but the sandbags around him were shredded, and the cooling fins of his heavy machine gun had at least 3 dents from .30-06 rounds. We had suppressed a heavy machine gun with pure rifle volume. In the bolt-action era, that was unimaginable. During this time, the Japanese upgraded too. They started fielding the Type 99 rifle. It used a 7.7mm round, more powerful than the Type 38. To be fair, the Type 99 was a sturdy gun. The chrome-lined bore resisted rust in the jungle, but it kept that fatal flaw, manual operation. Once, we caught a straggler. His rifle had a curious gadget, a wire monopod. The Japanese designers evidently wanted soldiers to lie prone for precision shots. Typical Japanese thinking, treating war like a shooting match. The prisoner told me their instructors emphasized one shot must hit. Because their logistics were terrible, they had to save bullets. And because the bolt action was slow, if you missed the first shot, you rarely got a second. That doctrine looked pathetic against the M1. I didn't care about one shot must hit. If I saw a shadow moving in the jungle, I fired 3 times immediately. First to probe, second to correct, third to kill. I had the capital to do that because I had 8 rounds and a semi-automatic action. This difference in margin for error created a massive psychological gap. The Japanese soldier fired under immense pressure. We just pulled the trigger. October 1944. We returned to the Philippines with MacArthur. The Battle of Leyte was a meat grinder fought in typhoons, rain, and endless mud. The terrain was broken, full of steep ridges and deep ravines. It was here that the famous controversy about the M1, the Ping, came to a head. If you watch Hollywood movies, you think the Ping is deadly. The legend goes that Japanese soldiers waited for the sound, knew the American was empty, and charged. Let me tell you, as someone who was there, 99% of the time, that's hogwash. First, combat is deafening. Machine guns, mortars, grenades, screaming, your own heartbeat. You can't hear a metallic ping from meters away in that din. Second, even if he heard it, would he dare charge? I usually had 2 or 3 buddies next to me with full clips. But in a close quarters fight on Leyte, the clip did save my life. Just not how you think. We were taking Breakneck Ridge. It was a slaughterhouse. The Japanese 1st Division, their best, was waiting for us. Harrison, now a master sergeant, and I ran face first into 2 Japanese soldiers by a muddy crater. I raised my gun. Bang, bang, bang. Ping. I killed one, but ran dry. The clip flew into the air. The remaining soldier charged with his bayonet. I knew I had no time to aim, but the M1 has an overlooked advantage: reload speed. With a Type 38 or 99, when empty, you open the bolt, grab a 5-round stripper clip, align it with the guide slots, push down hard, it often jams, yank the clip out, and close the bolt. Even a veteran needs 4 or 5 seconds. The M1? I grabbed a pre-packed 8-round en-bloc clip from my belt and shoved it into the receiver. Clack! The bolt slammed home automatically. 2 seconds. That Jap thought I was a toothless tiger, but he didn't know how fast my teeth grew back. Just as his bayonet was 2 meters away, I was loaded. Bang! He fell into the black sludge. This was the revolutionary advantage of the en-bloc clip system. You couldn't top it off easily, sure, but it made reloading incredibly fluid. In the blink of an eye on Leyte, those 2 seconds were why American casualty rates were far lower than the Japanese. In the Philippines, we also used a lot of M2 armor-piercing ammo. Black tips. The Japanese built bunkers out of coconut logs and hardwood. Lead bullets would get stuck. But the M1 with AP rounds was a demolition tool. I watched a soldier spot a sniper behind a 2-foot-thick coconut tree. He fired 5 rounds right into the trunk. The sniper fell out from behind it, chest perforated. The rounds went through the tree and the man. The Japanese 6.5 millimeter or 7.7 millimeter had good penetration, but against our increasingly common flak jackets and vehicle armor, they struggled. Our M1s, however, turned their cover into concealment. Late 1944, Ormoc Valley. The graveyard of the empire. The Japanese here were different from Guadalcanal, cut off, starving, diseased. But their resistance became more desperate and insidious. They hid in the grass like rats, shooting you in the back or running at Sherman tanks with mines. Let's talk squad firepower structure. A standard 1944 U.S. squad, 1 BAR, Auto Firepower Corps, 10 M1 Garands, semi-auto precision, maybe a Thompson or grease gun for the leader. The Japanese squad, 1 Type 96/99 LMG, if they had ammo, 8 to 9 bolt-action rifles. The difference was devastating. We had to clear elephant grass, tough stuff, taller than a man. The Japanese had to use bayonets to probe because firing gave them away. Us? We used recon by fire. If we suspected enemies ahead, the squad leader gave the order, and a dozen automatic and semi-automatic weapons opened up. We mowed the grass down. In Ormoc, we swept a Japanese ambush party this way. They died in the grass before they could pull a trigger. This was the arrogance of an industrial power, trading ammo for safety. I recall seeing a diary from a dead Japanese officer. The translator read it to me. The Americans' rifles never rest. Their bullets are like endless rain. Every time we try to aim, 10 bullets come back at us. This is not just war. It is a humiliation of the warrior's dignity. He was wrong. It wasn't about dignity. It was about efficiency. The M1 Garand was a killing machine, devoid of romance, existing solely to eliminate enemies with maximum efficiency. By late Philippines, the Japanese weapons we captured were garbage. The early Arisakas were works of art. But the last-ditch Type 99s in late '44 were crude pipes. Some had fixed sights, wooden butt plates, unfinished wood, and rough metal that cut your hands. In contrast, my M1, serial number in the 3 millions, had parts interchangeable with a 1942 rifle. Springfield, Winchester, International Harvester. Didn't matter who made it, it held that amazing industrial consistency. That's why we won. Not just because the M1 was semi-auto, but because the American system could produce 4 million of them, all equally precise, and put them in the hands of boys halfway around the world. Sitting in the mud of Ormoc Valley, eating Spam, looking at my shining M1, we realized Japan lost this war before the first bullet was fired. They were fighting an assembly line with a craft workshop. With the Philippines secured, we heard about the next stops: Iwo Jima, Okinawa. The news wasn't good. The Japanese had stopped fighting on the beaches. They were digging into the earth, turning mountains into honeycombed fortresses, and they were getting crazier. Kamikazes were hitting our ships. On land, they started human bullet tactics. On the transport leaving the Philippines, I wrote to my wife, Martha. Dear Martha, we took the Philippines. It was brutal, but we made it. This rifle, the M1, saved me many times. Sometimes I feel like it's not just a weapon, but a partner, but I have a feeling the next fight will be harder. The Japanese know they're losing, and a wounded beast is the most dangerous. I folded the letter and looked at the young replacements cleaning their brand new M1s, excitement and nerves on their faces. They didn't know what was waiting for them. On the islands ahead, the M1 would face its sternest test. It would no longer just suppress, it would become our last line of defense against men seeking only death. When thousands of Japanese poured out of holes close enough to smell their breath, semi-automatic fire would be our only hope. April 1945. I was transferred to the 96th Infantry Division, the Deadeyes, in the 10th Army. They needed experienced officers badly for the meat grinder that was Okinawa. If Guadalcanal was a jungle hell, Okinawa was a concrete abattoir. General Ushijima turned the southern part of the island into a massive fortress. Every hill, every rock concealed a firing port. Here, the M1's role shifted from suppression to survival. Fighting for Kakazu Ridge, we hit a wall. The Japanese used reverse-slope defenses, hiding in dead angles where mortars couldn't hit. When we crested the hill, we were met with machine guns or suicide squads popping up like gophers. One afternoon, I led a platoon to clear a cave complex. The standard tactic was blowtorch and corkscrew. Burn 'em with flamethrowers, seal 'em with explosives. But that required the flamethrower operator to live long enough to reach the cave. The cover duty fell to us riflemen. "Movement, left," a rookie yelled. 40 meters away, 2 Japanese were wheeling out a heavy machine gun from a hidden tunnel. In the bolt-action era, we'd have to hit the dirt, find cover, and duel, but that would give them time to set up. Once that woodpecker started singing, the flamethrower man, a walking bomb, was dead meat. "Fire! Don't let them set up." I raised my M1. No time to adjust sights or breathe. At this range, it was muscle memory. Bang, bang, bang! My first 3 shots hit the rock, spraying stone. With a bolt gun, I'd have failed. The pause to cycle the bolt would have been enough for them to fire. But I was semi-auto. In the half-second it took to correct my aim, I squeezed again. Bang, 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 ping! The next 5 rounds lashed out like a whip. One gunner took a hit to the chest and fell back, tipping the gun over. The other tried to grab it, but my men opened up. In seconds, 20 rounds hammered that 1-meter-wide cave mouth. Silence. This was the core value of the M1 on Okinawa. The ability to correct instantly through volume. You didn't need to be a sniper. You needed to hammer the target until it stopped moving. Late in the battle, the Japanese ran low on ammo. They turned to the macabre human bullet tactic. Soldiers strapped with explosives, holding anti-tank mines, or just wielding sharpened bamboo spears would rush out of the smoke or ruins, trying to take us with them. These attacks happened at point-blank range. I was resting in the ruins of the Shuri line when a bloodied Japanese soldier burst from behind a collapsed wall, a primed grenade in his hand, screaming like a beast. Distance, 5 meters. Sights were useless. I fired from the hip, an instinctive, desperate reaction. The M1's robust action saved me. Bang, bang, bang. The kinetic energy of 3.30-06 rounds slammed him backward. He exploded in midair. If I had held an Arisaka, if I missed the vital spot on the first shot, in the second it took to work the bolt, I would have been pink mist. On Okinawa, the M1 wasn't just a gun, it was the barrier between us and insanity. We captured piles of Japanese weapons. In the lulls, I'd inspect them. The contrast was shocking. I found a Type 99 from late in the war. It barely qualified as an industrial product. The stock was rough, splintered planks, no dust cover. The sights were crude, even crooked. The bolt felt like it was grinding against sandpaper. This was the symbol of Japan's collapse. Their factories, flattened by B-29s, skilled workers dead, raw materials cut off. They were making suicide tools in backyard workshops for children to use. Looking at that gun, you saw the desperation. They tried to fill the gap of material with spirit. But that crude rifle told us, spirit is powerless against physics. Compare that to my M1. Even in 1945, under the pressure of millions of units, my Winchester-made Garand held tight tolerances. Every part swapped with the gun I used 3 years ago. The steel was good. We even started seeing M1C and M1D sniper variants. The semi-auto had become precise enough for sniping. One night, I talked to an armorer sergeant. "Sir, you know why we're winning?" He oiled my rifle. "Not because we're braver. The Japs are crazier. We win because when my gun breaks, I can grab a part from a junk pile and it fits. The Japs have to file every part by hand." He nailed it. The M1 Garand was the apex of mass production. It represented Detroit, Pittsburgh, and the American worker. It wasn't just a gun. It was the American industrial system in the hands of a soldier. August 15, 1945. The war ended. There was no movie-style cheering. We sat in the Okinawa mud, feeling mostly a hollow, crushing fatigue. We disarmed the Japanese. It was a sight to behold. Thousands walked out of caves, piling their weapons into mountains. I looked at the rusting stacks of Type 38s and 99s, then at the shining M1s on our shoulders. Historians will argue, if the Japanese had semi-auto rifles, would it have changed the outcome? As a witness, I tell you, no. But we would have lost a lot more men. The Japanese tried to make semi-autos, like the Type 4, but they couldn't build them or couldn't afford to. The M1 required high-grade steel and precision machining to be reliable. Japan's industrial tolerances couldn't support mass production of such a weapon. So it wasn't just a gap in guns. Across the Pacific, we built a wall of fire with the M1. That wall crushed the Banzai Charge, suppressed the machine guns, and cleared the spider holes. I am old now, living in that old house in North Dakota. My leg still aches when it rains, a souvenir from Lady. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up. In the dream, it's still the humid jungle, the invisible enemy, but I always hear that sound, ping, the sound of the clip ejecting. In the war, that sound meant I had poured out my rage. It meant I was safe for a split second. It meant I had survived another firefight. It is the sound of freedom, the sound of technical superiority, and the heartbeat of a generation that had its youth stolen. Mr. John Garand, if you can hear me, I want to say thank you. Your invention didn't make war any kinder, but it allowed thousands of American boys named Tommy, Joe, or Bill to come home alive and watch our grandkids play on the lawn, and that is enough.